This is attempt number 2. Apparently the sound didn't work in the previous one, so I'm just going to redo it this way to save mucking around, and because it's easier to change the screen around doing it this way. So it is important to realize that all things stated in this video are opinion only. It has not been tested before a court. It's got lots of circumstantial evidence, that kind of thing. Please let me know if you can hear me. I'll write that as well, just in case people cannot hear me. Can you hear me? So can anyone hear me, or should I just do a pre-recorded video? And oh, that's great, you can hear me. So in this video we're going to be discussing Riccardo Bosi, Bosi I should say, with the Australian One Party, and Lahn of IMOP. And you know, it's going to cover some very controversial topics. It does have a bit of a lead up, but there's a reason for that. And I will wait until, you know, the end to address any comments. Please don't hate me as a messenger, that kind of thing. Please share this around so that a lot of people can hopefully get the information firsthand live. And I'm going to lose my voice during this. I was already going for, I don't know, 10 minutes or something, and unfortunately the sound wasn't working properly. So, and can you please let me know if there's like a silence for longer than, I don't know, 10 seconds, if maybe it's a reception or something like that, unfortunately. But here we go. So just flipping back to the computer. So this is Australia One's webpage. So you can see there, australian1party.com. And one interesting thing about the name Australian One, or Australia One I should say, is I like that you got a homophone, or a word that sounds the same, as in Australia One, change it to WON, as in you would win if you voted for that party. Besides that, it does seem like with the yellow pages, when people used to use that just say if you had Joe's Plumbing and you had a guy come up in the area called Alan, and it would be Alan's Plumbing, his name would get above Joe's name in the yellow pages, and people being too lazy to look past the first, you know, name or two, then Joe might have the idea of calling his company A1 Plumbing. So a lot of people that are probably under, you know, 30 years old don't probably know that, but it's just an interesting aside. So as you see, their slogan is "Our Best Future." It says Australia cannot wait. Our politicians are betraying us all. We must take action now to stop the major parties destroying our nation. And, you know, I agree with that little subtitle. So with Riccardo, many of you may have seen him. So he gets lots of videos with famous people on the internet celebrities such as Sasha Stone here. There's Max Steele. I saw him do a video with him. That fellow is Joel Jamal, who has a series called The Ark on YouTube, and basically it seems that, you know, Joel Jamal is the publicity guy for Riccardo, that his YouTube channel is basically an Australia One Riccardo Bosi channel. So also there's another little subheading: politics is no longer about left or right, it's about what's right and wrong. You know, again, I agree with that. And just to do disclosures, I have been offered over the years to join a number of political parties. I have ran as an independent many times in various elections. Obviously, I don't embarrass myself when doing so, because I get lots of offers to join various parties. And I do have a wide base of appeal, being someone from the centre, so I see good ideas and bad ideas from both sides of politics, and don't really believe in partisan politics where it's like, this party had a really great idea, but that's not our party, so we have to rubbish our idea. And our party had a crappy idea, but, they're our person, so we have to support them, as an example. So these parties, just for disclosure, include Australia One, the Great Australian Party. I was endorsed by them for the 2019 federal election, and I also ran against Alona, who's another person, part of this video. And what else? The Liberal Party, National Party, Labor Party, Palmer United Party, United Australia Party, which is Palmer United Party, One Nation. Who else? There's some local ones, like council election-based ones too, such as Back to Basics in Lake Macquarie, just as another example. And I didn't do my introduction this time, so I should have done that. So this is not legal advice, episode 81, or TINLA for short. And I'm Arjay Martin, for those that don't know. And this video is covering Riccardo Bosi and Australia One versus Lahn of IMOP, and also covers some presumed electoral fraud, and also quickly touching on some little other illegality. So there was a LNP party worker who was going around on social media calling Megan Scanlon, who is a Labor politician for the Gold Coast, the seat of Gavin, which is around, just say, if my face is the Gold Coast, and Gavin might be around here. I do have a flipped screen, mirrored screen, so maybe that's in the wrong spot, but you get the idea. So he apparently went around and was calling her things like a slut, which is completely ridiculous, because I think she was 25 or 26 or 23, something like that, and apparently her boyfriend is was a transport minister who's a 57-year-old man. She can date who the hell she wants. He can date who the hell he wants as well. And I didn't know, Wendy, that Riccardo and Alona have a joint interview being released tomorrow. Was it already recorded? Because that would be interesting. And anyway, with this video, I was going to do it a couple of days ago, but I just haven't had a chance. I did put on Facebook yesterday, what do you think of Riccardo Bosi and Alona Lahn? Please PM me. And so apparently, where did you get this rubbish on her? This is garbage. So I'm not sure what rubbish it is, and the video will show evidence of what I'm talking about. With the Megan Scanlon thing, that was in the newspapers. You also had, for another bit of illegal activity, there was a One Nation candidate called Sharon Losi, and she's on the Sunshine Coast from memory, or maybe a bit more north of there, and she had a Labor Party worker going up to her face, apparently abusing her, intimidating her, that I do have a picture of that was taken on my Arjay Martins for Australians page. And anyway, so I'll get back to this video, and I will save the comments for at the end of the video. Hopefully you can still all hear me and the sound's not, breaking apart or something like that, or going mechanical or silent or whatever. So I'm changing back to this screen. So we've looked at the Australia One webpage. Now these are the candidates that were for Australia 1 for the 2020 October 31 state election for Queensland. So we had Tracy Takats, or Takas, however you pronounce that, Thorne, and she was the independent or Australian 1 candidate for Currumbin. So if this is the border of Queensland and New South Wales, Currumbin's in this corner, so it's got like Coolangatta in the area. A lot of you know Tweed Heads, Coolangatta. So Tweed Heads is the New South Wales part, and then literally across Boundary Street is Coolangatta, or Queensland. So then we have Riccardo, and the reason why it says independent is it does take a long time to register a political party for Queensland. It's 500 members. It doesn't cost money to register the party, but it takes, 4 months or something like that. And you must be registered before the writs are issued, and the writs are issued by the governor, and it's basically a bit of paper saying, I hereby declare an election, close of nominations will be XYZ date, and the election on XYZ date, these writs are to be returned on Z date or whatever. But when the writs are issued, the Electoral Commission no longer processes party registration, so that explains why he ran as an independent, and same with Tracy. So it goes on, Riccardo is a retired Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel of 24 years, an author, award-winning speaker, a strategic and operational leader, and innovator with a record of achievements in both the private and public sectors, domestically and internationally, with extensive experience creating new, developing and existing organisations. Currently Riccardo, with a great team beside him, is building a new political party, Australia 1 Party. Riccardo is happily married, should be comma, with 3 children. So that's Riccardo. And a lot of people have been commenting to me about what they really like about Riccardo is that they say that he's a constitutional candidate. Was interesting. A lot of people don't like him for his stance on marijuana, but just thought that was an interesting thing. And I'll switch back to the screen. So hopefully the sound's still going good. And anyway, so this is IMOP's website. So imoparty.com. They should probably have had a second P in there, because otherwise it's IMO Party. But anyway, so Informed Medical Options Party, vote one free choice. It says no forced medication, which is a good thing. No compulsory or coerced vaccination, again a good thing, as in to not have it. And no fluoride in our water, again a good thing. You shouldn't be medicating people against their will. So it's got vote for IMOP at Queensland state election for your right to refuse or choose medical products without coercion. So it's also got various party platforms, etc. Maybe I'll do a separate video on that one other day. So this is Lahn. She is in charge of IMOP Queensland, and she does seem more active than the boss of IMOP, who is in New South Wales, Michael what's his last name? O'Byrne or something like that. Maybe someone can put that in the comments. So this says Lahn. Lahn is a former successful businesswoman living on the Sunshine Coast. Her passion now is in being a mother, a community leader, and a natural health advocate and freedom of choice ambassador. Alona is fearless and outspoken and is concerned about the poisoning of the earth, our food, water, air, people and animals. Alona supports natural therapies and medicines including medicinal cannabis, natural birthing practices, community schooling, community hubs, organic foods and farming, and sustainable energy. Her ultimate goal is to create a united, healthy, loving, sustainable future for us all. So that's Alona. And IMOP also was trying to get me to be their candidate. A few years ago, there was a interesting occurrence on the 30th of May that sort of blew things up, I guess you can say. So then this is the Sydney Morning Herald. It's an article about Riccardo Bosi. So it says, pandemic linked to rise of conspiracy theories. There's Riccardo's name. Goes on, Riccardo Bosi doesn't trust many people, which is a good thing, but he has faith in his belief the government has overreacted to the COVID-19 pandemic, which it has, that masks don't stop the spread of coronavirus, which they don't. The 5G mobile network is a surveillance tool of the Chinese government, which, you know, China has, and it's a known fact that China has these advanced surveillance technologies and a thing called the Chinese social credit system, and we're buying the systems from China, so, you know, that's more than reasonable. And vaccines can be ineffective, and, you know, that again is true. It can also be very deadly. So then it waffles on about the QAnon movement made its way from the dark web. It wasn't the dark web anyway, it was 4chan, then it went to 8chan, and that website got shut down, and then some other thing, blah blah blah. So there's Riccardo and his I'm sure lovely wife Rhiannon Bosi. So some of you have seen a video where Riccardo was saying about his wife unfortunately has multiple sclerosis, MS, and that he has to carry her to the toilet, etc. Some people have said that that is why he did not turn up to the candidate forums, or whatever you want to call them. I'm not sure what format they had in the seat of Nicklin, which is on the Sunshine Coast. So again, if this is Queensland, the Sunshine Coast is sort of about there, and then say Brisbane and the Gold Coast, just as an example. Then you got, you know, Townsville and Cairns and whatever. You know, it's probably more like up there, but just as an example. So that's an interesting thing. But if we go down to the bottom of this article, it says, Mr. Bosi's view about the dangers of some vaccinations and the security risk posed by the 5G network, which again, it's a security risk anyway. We even had Australian intelligence officers state that Huawei should not be building our 5G network. And, you know, there's a very good reason for that. But anyway, so really the article's probably a bit of a beat up. I haven't bothered reading the whole thing. There's a reason why some newspapers used to be called rags, and, you know, people used to use them as rags, so that'll do. So, which he believes is a surveillance tool of the Chinese government, have earned him the growing support of conspiracy theorists. While he and his wife, Rhiannon Bosi, who works as his chief of staff, do not identify as part of the QAnon movement, Mr. Bosi says he likes the idea of Q as a cute meme. So one interesting thing is obviously his wife is compos mentis, or at least has, you know, good times, despite her MS that she unfortunately has, because she is his chief of staff. So things don't sort of add up though, with that being why he allegedly could not go to a candidate forum. Just saying. So next we have an article from the Bega District News, and this is about Eden Monaro. So that is a federal seat of parliament, and they had a by-election, and Australia One leader Riccardo Bosi to stand as independent. Again, with the Australian Electoral Commission, it does actually cost money to register your party then. It needs, again, 500 members, the last time I checked. And it does cost money, I think maybe $2,500 from memory. But again, that's why Riccardo stood as an independent. For Eden Monaro, that's where I first found out about him, and we had the likes of Craig Cole go up, I think he's from Victoria, and support Riccardo and recruit for him and stuff like that. So, as you see, what did I have to say about this? Well, it's a bit annoying that I already half did a video, but then I have to remember what I'm doing. But anyway, so Eden Monaro, if this is the coast of New South Wales, say New South Wales is like that shape, then you have Canberra about here, Sydney about, that's probably, say Sydney there, Canberra and the ACT there, and Eden Monaro surrounds that, and basically includes things like the New South Wales northern, or New South Wales section of the Riverina area, that kind of thing. And anyway, so that article was from the 9th of June. When that by-election was, we'll find out in just a second. Eden Monaro, boom. So just looking up Eden Monaro. So as you see, there's a map of it. So there's an ACT in there, and you know, as I said, it surrounds there. And Mike Kelly, who is a Labor politician, I think he used to be a police officer, and again, you know, someone who was married to someone very much older than himself. So, like, you know, the person that was unjustly criticising Megan Scanlon is a knob, so to speak. But they had the by-election on the 4th of July, and obviously Riccardo was somewhere around there. You saw in that other article that he was in a protest somewhere in Sydney, from memory. So, next one. Clink. So, this is Riccardo's website. So, he has an organisation called Lionheart Australasia. It's not just Australia. If you're serious about moving, just flash too quickly so I can read it all. Blah blah blah. Anyway, so he has like a innovation, motivational speaker kind of thing. So Riccardo is an author and award-winning speaker, strategic, blah blah blah. That's pretty similar to, if not the same as what it was on the Australia One website. There he is, proudly serving Australia as a lieutenant colonel. If he was that rank where that picture's taken, you know, it might have been earlier days or whatever. And thank you for his service in doing that. Goes on about strategy, innovation, public speaking, policy development and implementation, and apparently from his videos he would go around the world, Qatar and whatever, and do motivation speaking, and I guess you know, trying to improve companies, I guess, that kind of thing. So just flip the camera around again. There's a little lion. And maybe someone else or someone's been lying. So, can anyone notice anything interesting about Riccardo's Twitter page? I'll give you a hint. Zoom in. That's right. He's apparently located in Sydney. So, that's one little bit of circumstantial evidence. And if you add up a lot of circumstantial evidence, then it becomes, you know, stronger and stronger. So, here's Joel Jamal's page. So perhaps Wendy can say what the ARC actually stands for, if it's an acronym for something. That would be interesting. But as you can see, he has done... Sorry, gotta handle this phone one-handed while I'm doing this other thing. As you can see, try videos, and I can scroll down. But most of the videos on here include Riccardo in them. So, you know, the ARC with Riccardo Bosi. There's Jordan Peterson, so that's interesting. There's the anti-Greta girl from Germany or wherever she's from. And anyway, so quite clearly this is a Australia One channel, if you want to call it that. So I'll close this. So Joel did a challenge for Riccardo. So it's Riccardo versus Romeo in Call of Duty. This will break the internet. So this was before the state election, and basically the deal was that if Riccardo or Tracy and also Trump got in, that Romeo, forget Romeo's surname, but you know, he's a gentleman who is famous for yelling at the camera and being very passionate, that kind of thing. So with Riccardo and Romeo, they were going to play Call of Duty. I'm not sure if they're still going to do that, but as you can see in his next one, so this was filmed the day after the election in the USA. So as you can see on the date there, 5th of November, so maybe it's 2 days, 3 days later actually. But you know, the election has not been settled yet. So you can quite clearly see there's Riccardo and there's Joel in Joel's lounge room, I take it. And you know, you can... No, I did silence the video, the computer I mean.
There are 6.
So
I would say that are
obviously Riccardo is currently in Sydney.
Large lead. We've got Nevada.
Anyway, so I'll just close that one. So that is a very big issue. And anyway, why that's a big issue, I'll get into. And as I said, it's a very big issue, and don't hate me for being a messenger. With Riccardo, I was trying to go interview him on going to the Central Coast, the Sunshine Coast, to do an in-person interview when I was invited by the Common Law Court, which Riccardo's now associated with via Graham Jeffs and Wayne Glue and whoever else, Dick Yardley, blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, I couldn't do that because he wasn't in the area, apparently. And anyway, so that also brings up another interesting thing that people were criticising Riccardo about. And, you know, some people might think it's illegitimate, others might think it's legitimate. But a problem that some people have said is a problem, at least, is that Riccardo stated that he has these 3 secret advisors. He does not state who they are. Maybe that's for a good reason, maybe it's not. I had a go at guessing that one might have been Steve Bannon from the USA, but now I don't necessarily believe that. And anyway, please stay with me, Wendy, till the end of the video, and then please, you know, make your comments. So, I believe that perhaps those secret advisors were Wayne Glue, maybe Graham Jeffs, although he did an earlier video saying that Riccardo's in treason or some garbage like that because all political parties are treasonous, blah, 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 which is incorrect. And I don't know what small picture view means. But anyway, so back to the video. So as you can see, there's Joel and there's Riccardo. And we go to Joel's Twitter, and look, what do you find? He's also in Sydney. So that's interesting. There he is with Romeo, and there's Joel, and there's Riccardo. So maybe they actually did play the Call of Duty or something. So I'll close that one. Any more information saying that they're in Sydney? So there's Joe Jamal, and this is the Canberra Declaration.org.au, and it says Joel Jamal is a 23-year-old part-time political activist and lecturer for the Sydney Institute for Christian Studies. So again, Sydney. So why this is important is coming up very soon. And Wendy said just ask, so I will ask, is Riccardo a resident of Queensland? There you go, I've asked. So then you have the Sunshine Valley Gazette, a local little newspaper, and it says new party's leader chooses Nicklin based on groundswell of support. So this goes on about a former Australian Army Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel is a late starter running as an independent candidate for Nicklin, and it says about his party, and it says how he stood for the New South Wales Senate for the Australian Conservatives at the 2019 federal election. Again, I think that's where the Joel Jamal link comes in via the Australian Conservatives. So that was Corey Bernardi's party, and then sort of went the way of the dodo, I think. Just as, perhaps Australia One might go, and IMOP for that matter, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, Palmer's party, they didn't do very well at this previous election. And really, they should merge and make a coalition effectively. But anyway, so it says, Mr. Bosi is in the process of moving to the coast, as into the Sunshine Coast, which you can read as to Queensland, with his family, and chose to run for Nicklin because of a groundswell of support from people in the area. So rumours were that apparently he had already moved to Queensland, and that he had to move there because his wife was very disabled and needed the sunshine, heat, that kind of thing, and that's fair enough. But this article again indicates that he was not living in the area, and you don't have to live in the area to run in an election. You do need to live in the state though, and to not live in there makes very, very big problems, which I'm going to get into. And there's no point attacking me as a messenger, because I'm just saying how I see things. So anyway, and I should point out too that Alona doesn't live in the seat of Nicklin either, nor does her husband Grant, who ran for the seat of Morayfield, which is around Caboolture, either. So I'll just point that out too, but that's not the same as living in a different state. You can run in a seat where you don't live in, but as long as you still live in the same state. So some people are starting to get what the problem is. So this is the seat of Nicklin. So you see it's focused around the city or town of Nambour, and it goes up to Black Mountain. There's a place called Federal up there, Kuran, however you pronounce that, whatever. So what I think of when I think of Nambour is when Ella High Priest was stuck in the hospital there, and I tried helping Ella High get out, that kind of thing, provide a lot of information to his missus, that kind of thing. I was going to drive up there, but he got released the day just literally before I started driving there, after helping for a few days. So that's what I think of Riff Nambour. Anyway, so there's Nambour near Noosa Heads. Then you got Fortitude Valley, which is part of Brisbane, the Gold Coast. And then all the way down there is Newcastle, the Central Coast, which isn't really a city. It should be like Gosford or something shown. And Sydney. So, that is, if you catch a train, 1 day and 9 hours to travel there. If you... can't see my little cursor. If you walk there, it would take 201 hours. But more sensibly, if you drove there, it would be half a day, roughly. It depends which way you go. 10 to 12 hours, 13 and a half hours, 14 hours. You can go via Muswellbrook, or, what's that? I guess via Gloucester, or do the coastal route. And that is if they aren't doing roadworks on there, Back in I think it was 1988 or 1989, there were a couple of fatal bus crashes because the Pacific Highway was single laned for a lot of the area, and then it was supposed to be fixed within, I don't know, I think it's been ongoing saying, hey, we're going to fix it within 10 years for like the last 30 years. So it's still not dual carriageway all the way. Last time I travelled down there, which was some time ago, but they do little sections at a time. So up here at, say, like around Woodburn, below Woodburn, Woodburn always makes me think of Copper Art, where the original Copper Art started. There's a house along the road with a top bloke called Will Ponweiser, and he makes awesome sculptures. Used to do a lot of work for special effects for movies, that kind of thing. I thoroughly recommend, if you do travel from Sydney to Nambour or anywhere in between, if you are going past Woodburn, which is about where my finger is, so you got Byron Bay, Ballina, or Lennox Heads between, and then Woodburn's probably 20 minutes, 30 minutes south of Ballina, then, look for the house that's got all these cool, decorations out the front. Anyway, so, and also that doesn't say what part of Sydney the Riccardo lives in, apparently. So, another interesting concept is the following. Maybe I should have had this in a different order. But if Riccardo moved to Queensland, being from Sydney, then he would have to stay 14 days in paid quarantine, him paying for it, under these current COVID directions. So how can he be in Joel Jamal's house week after week when he's supposed to be in Queensland? Because you must be a Queensland resident to run in Queensland state elections. So obviously, again, circumstantial evidence says that he couldn't run in the election. Anyway, so I'll flip this around. So this again has the current COVID border restrictions. So we're up to border restriction direction number 17. And again, they still have the, who can come to Queensland? Do I have to complete 14 days of mandatory quarantine if I come to Queensland from a hotspot? So they've changed the terminology. So basically, if that was Queensland, that was New South Wales, there was a hard border, and then they let Tweed Heads in, and then a few weeks ago, they let in places like Moree, that's say over here, and then they expanded what they call this border bubble. And now it is going to include all of New South Wales apart from the hotspot. And the hotspot includes all of Greater Sydney. So if Joel Jamal lives in Sydney and Riccardo lives in Sydney, and also it's important to say that even if, just say, Riccardo lived at Katoomba, which is over here, the Blue Mountains, outside of Sydney, then if he visited Joe Jamal's house in Sydney somewhere, then he would be within this COVID hotspot and then have to quarantine for 14 days. So, again, it's very interesting. So, another important concept. In order to be on the electoral roll, as we'll find out with actual legislation in Queensland, you must live in that area for at least 1 month before. I don't know what just happened there. So I'm not sure how much got missed out on, but it just popped up on the screen saying broadcast interrupted, resume or pause or something like that, resume or finish or whatever. So anyway, just check my battery. I still have battery because I'm plugged into the car. So in order to be on the Queensland electoral roll, as we'll find out, and I'll go through the actual legislation, you must be a resident in the area, in an area in Queensland, for at least 1 month prior to going on the electoral roll. And in order to be a candidate, you must be on the electoral roll. And also, that has to be 1 month at least before the close of nominations or close of the electoral rolls. So we'll have a look. We've got so this is the Queensland Electoral Commission, or Electoral Commission Queensland. I don't know why they call it that way. May as well just call it the other way. It sounds better, I think. But anyway, so this is the election timetable. So as you can see, on Saturday, the 10th of October, electoral rolls close. So that means Riccardo Bosi must have legally been a resident of Queensland since before the 9th, roughly, of September 2020. So, tell me if I'm getting this wrong, of course, but if he's living in Sydney, then how can he be a resident of Queensland since the roughly 9th of September 2020? Someone tell me. So people say that he's the constitutional candidate, yet we'll get into even the Queensland Constitution that he apparently has breached. So maybe the lion picture is about lion and he's not the constitutional candidate. Also, another sort of sad thing is that he's fallen for the David Wynne Miller-esque stuff, such as Graham Patrick Jeff's garbage about maritime law, blah, blah, blah. So he's a bit of an ultra-crepidarian. So it seems to me ultra-crepidarian is someone who pretends that they know what they're talking about, but they don't know what they're talking about. So it seems to me, personally, that he has seen a bandwagon and then gotten on the bandwagon and then, quickly studied it and pretended he knew about this, secret law all along, when it's not even secret law, it's made up garbage. Yeah, so Liliana claims that Bosi lives in a Sutherland Shire in Sydney, which is southern Sydney, which again is in a COVID hotspot area. So if that's correct, then he's not a resident of Queensland, and therefore it was electoral fraud, which can see him go to jail, which I don't wish upon him, of course, and there are mitigating factors like him looking after his wife and, his age and some other things that perhaps he might end up with a suspended sentence if it goes to court and whatever. But, it is what it is. So, back to the little thing. So, Joel is apparently in the Bankstown area, roughly, and we say roughly, of course. Don't want to dox anyone, etc., but obviously that's saying within Greater Sydney and, within the COVID hotspots. So, with the electoral roll closing on the 10th, Then a day later, they had, well, technically a day and 2 hours later, they had the close of nominations. In order to run in Queensland, as I said, you must be a Queensland resident, and then people could vote on the 19th. And then the election was on the 31st, and the writs would not have been returned yet. They wait for postal votes to come in and full counting, etc. So then we have this about the election results. I think this was open for, had it open for a couple of days. So anyway, so close that one. Now we will go into the nuts and bolts. How can Ilona Lahn potentially get about $12,000 in electoral funding with dobbing Riccardo Bosi in, if he is indeed guilty, which we aren't presuming that he is guilty, but, you know, how can she get him knocked off the ballot papers and all of the ballot papers recounted as if he didn't exist? And possibly, after that, being an affected party, then, you know, there might well be a by-election there as well. Really, even if you're going to have a by-election, then they should still do the recounting of ballots without him if he's indeed fraudulently on the electoral roll and fraudulently a candidate, because even though it does not directly affect perhaps the election itself, in that they'll still have Marty Hunt, the LNP guy, win, it has affected Ilona Lahn, and really it should be done for justice, and for justice to be seen to be done if indeed Bosi is guilty. So I'll go to the electoral results. So this is the seat of Nicklin. So scroll up, you can see a bar graph for the official first preference count. So that won't be settled probably until, you know, a few days, because the post might take a while to get in, that kind of thing. But as you see, Riccardo Bosi beat Ilona Lahn by a little bit, and Marty Hunt got that many votes, which is a lot. It's like 38%. And then you have, I'll just scroll down to make sure I get the right parties. So Michael Cardinal was One Nation dude, and Sue Etheridge was the Greens. So the Greens vote will go to, this is very, very rough, but Greens votes usually go to the Labor Party, and then pretty much everyone else's votes would have went to Marty Hunt. And this is approximately as I said. So, can someone please tag Ilona Lahn into this video, and also Riccardo Bosi, because this is like the most important bits for them, which might be interesting to see what their video, if it's even going to be released, their joint video, is tomorrow. Maybe they're going to merge parties, who knows? But that would be interesting. So, as you see, Riccardo there and Ilona there. So, Riccardo got 1,348 votes compared to 1,168 votes for Ilona. He got 4.63% of the vote compared to 4.01% of the vote. And, you know, there might be a couple of votes here and there in recounts and, you know, postal votes or whatever that change that very, very slightly, but that's pretty much what it is. And then also just for interest, if it's going to work, apparently it's not. But I did have Currumbin's results open as well, but apparently the computer's having a hissy fit. So I'll just skip that. But, you know, they got good percentage for brand new party and whatnot, but if it's based on fraud, then what then? So this is the State Handbook Funding and Disclosure Manual for September 2018, which is a current edition. As you can see, this goes on about electoral funding. So basically, if you get more than 6% of the vote in Queensland, you get money. It's supposed to be reimbursements for money spent. Obviously, Ilona has spent a lot of money on, including, you know, donated money and whatever, but she can get that money back personally. If, you know, this is all prefaced with if Riccardo turns out he's dodgy and fraudulent, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, she bought a second-hand van and got it wrapped. The wrap itself probably cost maybe $4,000 or something like that, because I was looking at buying a second-hand van myself before I even knew they had a van, and getting it wrapped because obviously, you know, the paint's a bit crappy and stuff like that on a cheap second-hand van. I can only drive automatic cars and don't really want to be trying to learn how to drive a manual, that kind of thing. But anyway, so if you get more than 6% of the vote in Queensland, you are entitled to reimbursement of, I'll just turn the camera around, $1.57 per vote for the candidate, and also their party is also entitled to $3.14 per vote. So in other words, because Ilona does have a registered party, and I assume that she was funding through donations or, you know, her own money as well, blah, blah, blah. I spent lots of money and still owe lots of money for my own campaign because I was going to run in Surfers Paradise until a massive security breach, but I still have to contractually pay people for, you know, flyers being created and some other interesting things that I won't get into, because then I can use those for next election that I run in without tipping people off. You know, some clever ideas there. But because IMOP is registered, then she's entitled, if she got more than 6% of the vote. And remember, if Bosi was very similar to Ilona, then in terms of, you know, no compulsory vaccination, which of course there never should be, then, you know, a lot of those votes that went to him would have went to Ilona, if not all of them, if he didn't run in the election. And obviously Ilona was very pissed off and sad and angry and probably anxious and whatever, I imagine, when he declared that he was running in the election. So basically you add those two figures together and that's what she could get per vote. So add the votes together and she could get 2,424 first preference formal votes. And that would be, I forget the figures, she just got over 4%, I think he got maybe 4.37% or something, so say about 8.4% of the vote, just rounding up. So if you multiply that by $4.71, which is the dollar value in electoral funding, then she could get $11,417.04 in electoral funding. That's you and I, if you live in Queensland, our tax money could go to her and reimburse her for her, you know, flyers, posters, as in core flutes, posters you stick on walls too, petrol money for driving a van, the van wrap. She also got a car wrapped, I believe, blah, blah, blah. So, Ilona could get nearly $12,000, or she could just shut up and not say anything. And, you know, surely other people will send this video to the Queensland Electoral Commission anyway, so it may as well be her sticking up for herself, standing up for herself, if you want to call it that, and getting the electoral funding that she may well be entitled to. So, now I'm going to go through some legislation. Let's start with the Queensland Constitution. So, Queensland actually has two constitutions in force. The 67 one is basically blank now with the repeals, or, the bits that, will say section 1 repealed, section 2 repealed, so they no longer exist, those sections, but they have this constitution on top of it. And of course you can go through arguments that, Queensland doesn't have an upper house, so therefore all the legislation since 1922, when the upper house was abolished, and against the 1917 referendum, are illegal and void and inoperable and whatever else you want to call them. But let's just say that it is valid for the time being. So, you have section 21 of the Queensland Constitution. Eligibility to be a candidate and to be elected as a member. A person is eligible to be a candidate and to be elected as a member of the Legislative Assembly if the person, A, is an adult Australian citizen, yes, living in Queensland, apparently, and has any further qualifications required under an act and is not disqualified under an act. Note, for an example of subsection 1B and C, see Parliament of Queensland Act 2001, section 64, qualifications to be a candidate and be elected as a member. And subsection 2 says subsection 1 is subject to any condition imposed under an act. So it's basically, on top of any other disqualifications, etc. So, next we go to the Parliament of Queensland Act 2001, section 64. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Qualifications to be a candidate and to be elected a member. A person may be nominated as a candidate for election and may be elected as a member of the Assembly, that means the lower house, Queensland's only got the lower house, for an electoral district only if the person is an adult citizen living in Queensland, apparently, enrolled on an electoral roll for the electoral district or another electoral district, if he doesn't live in Queensland and not a resident for 1 month before the writ's closed, then he cannot be on the Queensland electoral roll. C, not a disqualified person under subsection 2 or 3. Subsection 2. A person is a disqualified person if, so maybe I'll just sort of skip through this a little bit, but not subject to a term of imprisonment or detention, periodic or otherwise. So also if you are out on bail, you shouldn't be a candidate. Within 2 years before the day of nomination has been, and that is before nomination, has been convicted of an offence against the law of Queensland, another state or the Commonwealth, and sentenced to more than 1 year's imprisonment. So that is a serious, indictable offence. Has been convicted within 7 years before the day of nomination of an offence under the Criminal Code, sections 59 and 60. So that relates to bribery and corruption, basically, when you're in Parliament. So, you have Bill say, hey, give me $10 million and I'll put I'll approve a airport on your land or something like that, because that's a serious matter that would be a state issue rather than just a council issue, even though council may have, some kind of voice as a stakeholder. Has been convicted within 10 years before the day of nomination of a disqualifying electoral offence, or has been convicted, not pardoned, of treason, sedition, sabotage under Queensland or another state or territory, it should really say, or the Commonwealth, an undischarged bankrupt, a debtor, so someone that owes money and has like a payment plan to avoid being fully bankrupt, if you want to call it that way, is not entitled to be a candidate for election or to be elected as a member of the Assembly under another law. So, if you can't be a Oh, my legs are going to sleep. If you can't be on the electoral roll in Queensland, you can't be a candidate, therefore you can't run for election. It's also got about, the Governor-General can't run, you can't be a judge in any state or federally, and should really say or, territory as well. Blah, blah, blah. Disqualifying electoral offence means a disqualifying electoral offence within the meaning of the Electoral Act 1992, Section 2, or an offence that would be a disqualifying electoral act within the, or a disqualifying electoral offence within the Electoral Act, blah, blah, blah. That's, about previous convictions, etc., before the Electoral Act. So, now we have the Electoral Act 1992 definition. So this is Section 2 that it referred to. The dictionary in Schedule 1 defines particular words used in this Act. So then we go to, just close that one by the way. So then we go to Schedule, just skip one. Just checking where the schedule. Okay, so I'll scroll down to Schedule 1, it'll be at the bottom, and then I'll go through the other bit. So, this is the definitions. Let's go to the start of it. Schedule 1, Dictionary. So, as people that watch my videos know, that you, firstly for definitions, look in the Act itself, look in similar acts, look in non-similar acts, look for a judge's interpretation of that for that particular circumstance, or look at the dictionary, can be a technical one or even a standard dictionary in terms of ordering of importance of definitions. So we go down to candidate. Disqualifying electoral offence means an offence of which an offender is convicted under or after the commencement of the Electoral and Other Acts Amendment Act, Section 5. So that's an amending act, so, let's change this act. That relates to an election of a member of an Australian Parliament or an election to the office of chairperson, mayor, blah, blah, blah. Referendum, skip through. G'day friends and foes, this is TINLA episode 81 part 2. So this concerns Riccardo Bosi of the political party which is so far not registered, Australia 1, and also Lahn with IMOP. So just show that. So this is part 2. So I may as well wait until some people come on. It is important to remind everyone, as per part 1, that these are allegations only, opinion only. It has not been proven in court. There is evidence which is circumstantial, blah, blah, blah. So, please keep that in mind. And basically, with the first attempt at part 1, which was going to be the whole thing, apparently there was some kind of sound issue. People started saying, I can't hear you, I couldn't hear you from the beginning. So I redid it, and then my phone battery died. I guess the car, turns off the accessories after 20 minutes or something like that, and then the battery was obviously draining as it was doing Wi-Fi for the laptop and doing a live video. So I did listen to where I was up to with the video that cut out, and I will be joining this to that video. And this part of the video covers alleged criminal acts that may have been committed by Riccardo Bosi including, you know, maximum penalties of up to 10 years imprisonment. Of course, I don't wish that upon him, and if he gets a decent lawyer, or even a crappy one, they should say about mitigating circumstances if it ever did go to trial, if he did get charged criminally, including mitigating circumstances such as looking after his beloved wife, you know, his age, his service to this country as a part of the special aerial services, special air services, whatever, or, you know, various other things. So I'll just change screen on the computer. So where I was up to was the Electoral Act 1992, Queensland, and I was in the Schedule 1, which is the definitions, if the camera turns around, and anyway, I'll just continue. So disqualifying electoral offence means an offence of which an offender is convicted after the commencement of blah blah blah. Already went through that, but I was up to here. Person on an electoral roll, so if you do an offence against the enrolment of someone on the electoral roll, etc., for which a penalty imposed included a sentence of imprisonment other than a sentence of imprisonment for non-payment of fine. So you can get a jail for not paying fines, but you know, that's not a serious thing. I will zoom in because the other video did not save as or upload as a high definition one because the battery died, but at least the video didn't just disappear into the ether. So it can also be restitution or other amounts. So basically, if you do electoral fraud, then you're disqualified from running in elections and being, you know, able to be elected. So there's also section 64, which concerns enrolment. My cord's just tangled here. Sorry about that. So entitlement to enrolment. A person is entitled to be enrolled for an electoral district, that means in Queensland, if the person either is entitled to be enrolled under the Commonwealth Electoral Act, so that's a federal act of Parliament, 1918, if you want to look it up for the fun of it, for the purposes of that act, in its application in relation to an election within the meaning of that act, or is not entitled but was entitled, so that's talking about a previous election act, but this part is critical, lives in the electoral district, so must live in a Queensland electoral district to be on a Queensland electoral roll, and has lived in it for the last the last month electoral act, and even if some then moved around electorates every half month, then technically they could never be entitled to be enrolled in the election. So then it waffles on, it's not really waffling on, but, you know, me waffling on about it, about people who are sentenced to be imprisoned, blah, blah, blah. So just scroll down, let's look if there's any important stuff. Hopefully this part of the video is only about 15 minutes long, then I can stitch it together with the first half or first 90% and then upload it to YouTube and then share it on Facebook as well. So blah blah blah, that waffles on about redistribution. So what that is just say this area on a map was the seat of X, and then this was the seat of Y, but then later in the year or the next year or a couple of years later, then that part here of this electorate actually turns into this electorate, as an example. So as I said in the first half, basically Riccardo Bosi had to be a full-time resident of Queensland for at least a month before the writs were issued, which was on the 10th of October. So if he was living in Queensland from 9 October until 10 October and then got on the electoral roll on the 10th of October, that would be fine. Yet, apparently, the evidence shows that he lives in New South Wales, in Sydney, that he has not been, in Queensland any time lately. If he was, then he would have to be in quarantine that he has to pay for 14 days, and therefore it appears that he is not entitled to be on the Queensland electoral roll, therefore he can't be a candidate in election. Therefore, when he put his name on the electoral roll, he was apparently committing fraud. If he had help with that, if someone said, if he sent it to Bill Smith and Bill Smith said, hey Riccardo, put your address as my address and I will forward it to the Queensland Electoral Commission, then Bill Smith could well be in trouble for conspiracy as well. That's not conspiracy theory, that's a crime of conspiracy, which is two or more people getting together for illegal purposes. And then, ignoring that, for the moment, I will go through individual criminal code breaches that appear to have occurred with Riccardo Bosi in Queensland. Even though he does not live in Queensland, the law in Queensland applies to him, especially as it relates to Queensland documents. And like I said, all of these aren't facts, but they are opinions, reasonably held beliefs, based on circumstantial evidence. It is important that people maintain a sorry for losing my voice, but maintain an air of neutrality and whatnot, and not prejudgment. Obviously, things have to go to court if they are going to go to court. And my argument is that if he did commit fraud, that what should happen for the seat of Nicklin is that they should recount all of the votes, excluding Riccardo Bosi from the vote. So all of his, number one preferences get distributed as, this one says Lahn as number two. This one says, BJ as number two or whatever. Most of those votes would probably go to Lahn as first preferences, and then she may well have about 8.4% of the first preference primary votes, which is more than the minimum 6% to get electoral funding. She could then, for herself, as well as the party, which I'm sure she spent, a lot of her own money, and if not, donations to her, which therefore she can claim back as reimbursements to herself for getting more than 6% of the vote, and can get about $11,500 roughly from it. So I'll flip back to the computer now, trying to be quick as well. So this is a Queensland Criminal Code Act 1899. So you got Chapter Division 2. That's a bit weird. It should be Division 2, Chapter whatever, maybe. But anyway, Legislative Assembly, elections and referendums. So in Queensland we only have a Legislative Assembly, which is the lower house. They got rid of illegally, really. But the upper house, which was the Legislative Council back in 1922, despite a referendum in people wanting to keep that Chamber of Parliament. And of Westminster parliamentary systems, that you have two chambers of parliament for checks and balances, blah blah blah. But anyway, so you got section 98A, reference to election or referendum in this chapter, blah blah blah. So skip that little section, but what it's saying is it refers to elections to the Legislative Assembly. Section 98B, false or misleading information. A person who gives information to the Electoral Commission of Queensland under the Electoral Act 1992 or Referendums Act 1997, including information in a document that the person knows is false or misleading in a material particular, is guilty of a crime. So if someone, gives a incorrect house address in that, they might be 19A and they do a 19 little a instead of a 19 capital A for the street number, as an example, might be a non-material thing. Or if they give the wrong phone number, as an example, if they don't want to be called. But anyway, I wonder if I can make this go to a different camera on this phone so it's a bit clearer. I'll just swipe the camera, hopefully it clears up, because it does look a bit blurry from here, but I do have the screen right down, so maybe that's a issue. So, maximum penalty, 7 years imprisonment. So, lying in a material way, something that actually matters, to the Electoral Commission of Queensland, 7 years imprisonment maximum. Subsection 1 does not apply to a person giving a document if when giving the document to someone, the person informs the other person to the best of the person's ability how it is false or misleading, and if the person has or can reasonably obtain the correct information, gives the other person the correct information. So here we're talking about someone apparently living in Sydney, New South Wales, lying to say that they live in Queensland so they could run in the Queensland election. And also, they could have gotten electoral funding for that and other benefits. So, here's an additional one. On being, or with being in the election and also on the electoral roll, then voting if not entitled. So potentially whoever Riccardo said he was living at their house, they might well have voted for Riccardo illegally as well, which is another, big issue as well, and fraudulent as well. But, maybe they forwarded him the ballot paper and then he filled it out and then forwarded it back. I'm sure it would have raised the alarms if the Electoral Commission got a enrolment from Sydney, New South Wales, post-stamped, postmarked, whatever you want to call it, for someone claiming that they've lived in Queensland for a month, at least. So, a person who votes at an election in the name of another person, including a dead or fictitious person, commits a misdemeanor. So, a misdemeanor is like a not-so-serious crime. So, in the USA, you have felonies as an example, which is a very serious crime, which is an indictable act in Australia, but misdemeanors, not so bad. But it's still more than a summary offence. So, 2. That's subsection 2. A person who votes at an election more often, so that's, people voting multiple times, maximum penalty, 2 years. A person who casts a vote at an election that the person knows the person is not entitled to cast commits a misdemeanor, so there's another 2 years. A person who procures another person to vote an election who, to the procurer's knowledge, is not entitled to vote at the election commits a misdemeanor, another potential 2 years. A person who, at an election for which voting is by post, attests a signature to the voting paper, basically when it's not theirs. I'm just summarising very briefly. Another 2 years. So we already had 7 years plus 2 years, plus this may have multiple offences in it, depending on the facts of the case. So now we have section 120 who gives to another person under the Authorising Act for an election for a purpose relating to the election information that the giver knows is false or misleading in a material particular commits a crime. So that's not a misdemeanor, that's a crime. Misdemeanors and summary offences are still crimes, but it's sort of like common law, it has different meanings in different contexts. But maximum penalty, 7 years imprisonment. Subsection 1 does not apply if, when giving the information, and then it's basically repetition of the previous thing that, they're giving the information, they say correct, something like that. So, section 408C, fraud. A person who dishonestly applies to his or her own use or the use of another person, property belonging to another, which can also even be property belonging to the people of Queensland, i.e. electoral funding, that kind of thing. You also have attempts at crimes as well. But anyway, and property belonging to the other person, blah, blah, blah. Or B, obtains property from any other person, or C, induces person to deliver property to any person, or D, gains a benefit or advantage, pecuniary or otherwise, for any person. So that can be getting election funding, as well as, donations and all this other stuff, or lying, misrepresenting that they are running in an election that they aren't entitled to. Or E, causes a detriment, pecuniary or otherwise, to any person. So an example here, if Bosi did do fraud, or doesn't live in Queensland and is not entitled to be on a ballot paper, therefore not entitled to not entitled to be on the electoral roll, therefore not entitled to run in the election, then Lahn may well have had a detriment, being a pecuniary, a monetary disadvantage, as well as other disadvantages, for him running against her. It made her get 4% of the vote, where she may well have had 8.4% of the vote otherwise. But anyway, so commits the crime of fraud, maximum penalty, 5 years imprisonment. And then there are aggravating circumstances which can make it 14 years imprisonment. So if they're a director or officer of a corporation, is Australia 1 a registered company? I don't know. Blah, blah, blah. Just having a quick look. So there's further aggravating circumstances where it can be 20 years imprisonment. That's a maximum. Of course, a lot of people don't go to jail. They'll get what's called a suspended sentence. So just say, they might say you've got a 12-month suspended sentence, or 12-month sentence wholly suspended. So that basically means they're on parole for 12 months. And if they be a naughty boy or girl and get caught, then they get in trouble and actually in prison for that period, plus also for whatever else they have done. So this can apply when the offender carries on the business of committing the offence. That could mean a lot of different things. Let's scroll down a little bit. And obtain includes get, gain, receive, or acquire in any way. And, so it could be potentially 20 years imprisonment for one charge alone. Then we've got section 430, fraudulent falsification of records. Any person who, with intent to defraud, so you just need the intention to be a fraudster, makes a false entry in any record, or omits to make an entry in any record, or gives any certificate or information that is false in a material particular, or in any way falsifies, destroys, alters, or damages any record, or produces or makes use of any record the person knows is false in a material particular, commits a crime, maximum penalty 10 years imprisonment. So here, if Bosi does indeed not live in Queensland, and, if he falsely went on the Queensland electoral roll, would have the intention to defraud because you have electoral funding, one that he could get potentially. You know, it's only the intention needed, so it's before the fact. It doesn't matter that he didn't get any electoral funding. 2, any donations. 3, any detriment to any other party, i.e. to Lahn, then 10 years imprisonment maximum. And you also have other things too, which I haven't even looked up, but let's look up uttering a forged. Let's just look up uttering. Here you go. Forging or uttering electoral paper. That's probably more to do with actual vote. Forges an electoral paper. Does that mean ballot paper, perhaps? Electoral paper means ballot paper, declaration, envelope, so that could well apply. Or any other document issued by the Electoral Commission under the Electoral Act. So, look, here's another one. 98D is another one. It doesn't say the penalty. Yes, it does. Sorry, I was going to say it doesn't say it at the end. But another 10 years imprisonment. Where's forgery and uttering? So what uttering is you have a forged document, which can be a falsified document, and you utter it, so that's you're using that document. So a person who with intent to defraud forges a document or utters a forged document commits a crime. Maximum penalty. So it can be 14 years for some things. It can be 7 years for others. It looks more like here would be 3 years because it doesn't specifically say, it's got about wills and stuff like that, but it doesn't say Electoral Act or elections. Subsection 1, blah, blah, blah. Registration document includes blah, blah, blah. So you've got that as well. Then it says knowingly. That's like a definition. Don't need to worry about that. There could be other uttering forged documents as well. Here you go. Yeah, I think I already did 98D, didn't I? Yes. Forgery and uttering, 488. Blah, blah, blah. So skip that one. Then we've also got offences of dishonesty. It's 581. That's a section. And this relates to upon an indictment charge a person with any of the following. I'll reread that. I'm getting tired. My eyes are very strained. Upon an indictment charging a person with any of the offences following, that is to say, fraud with or without a circumstance of aggravation. You also got obtaining property, which is related. Unlawfully receiving anything under section 433, that's probably not related, but someone can really check that if they want. Maybe I will too. Or counselling, that means encouraging or getting others to, or procuring any other person to commit any such offence. The person may be convicted of any other such offences committed with respect to the same property if such other offence is established by the evidence. So a summary of that is, hey, look, if you do fraud, then you don't have, for that particular offence, the concept of double jeopardy. So it's not like you say, hey, look, I got charged under section, 488, so you can't charge me under section blah, blah, blah that may have a higher penalty. You can be charged for multiple things at once. So anyway, I'll leave the video there and then join this video up to the other one and then upload it to YouTube. Please like, share, subscribe, donate some money if you'd like. Some people might be getting $11,500 that they would not have otherwise gotten because of my video. And again, please don't hate me for revealing the truth, for being a messenger. It wasn't me who may well have committed electoral fraud. I live in the state of Queensland. I'm allowed to run in elections in Queensland and vote in Queensland. And, you have people who talk about strategy and improvement, self-improvement, and, improving businesses, that kind of thing, as well as being a military man. He should know that, know the lay of the battlefield, know the rules of engagement before you go to a battle, because unless you're going to win, which, using World War II analogies, the Allies did lots of war crimes against the Axis ones, Germany, Japan, Norway, Finland, whatever, Norway being occupied, that is, then, they got away with it because they ultimately won and kicked the Axis's butt. But, also Sun Tzu, to know yourself, all the stuff about that, to know yourself but not know your enemy. You've got a bit of a chance. If you don't know yourself and you don't know the enemy, and I'm not saying I'm the enemy, I'm just saying, like, in battle, that, you got to know, putting it as election thing, then you've got to know your own party as well as everyone else's party, as well as every other stakeholder. And the rules and stuff like that, to know yourself and to know your enemy, victory's guaranteed. Just some of those philosophical things. But if Bosi has committed these offences, then obviously he's not the constitutional candidate, because if he has breached the Queensland Constitution and Electoral Act, and what else was there? Criminal Code Act. What else? I think there was one other one that I've already closed in a previous video. Then, don't blame me. I didn't do it. So, anyway. Please share this video around, especially when it's stitched together. It is of critical importance for the truth. I'm just being a beacon of the truth, and what I believe should happen, because basically, if you can show in an election that there was a material illegality that could well have meant someone else got elected, then, basically a by-election is certain. Whereas in this case, you have a candidate who has suffered detriment, potentially, due to the alleged fraud of another candidate, as well as uttering forged documents and all these other offences I've already gone through. So, really, they should recount all the ballots, excluding Bosi as a candidate. So, wherever someone has Bosi, you just skip his name and put it as the next preference, and then, go from there. And then I do believe that there should be a by-election, but the courts may well disagree there and say, it's not in a public interest to have another election because the LNP guy won, and, it's not like it was the second person saying the first person that came first cheated. It was, people down the run of the ladder, and it was excellent to 4% of the vote anyway, and about 4.4% I think Bosi got, and even better for Alona if she got 8.4% of the vote. But, it still materially affects the election in that people should be able to go back to the polls and say, hey, look, now that I know the truth, I'll vote for this person, that person, that person. And, some of those people might well live in the electorate, I should say. Other people might not. Many people might not have known that some of their candidates didn't live in an electorate, let alone a different state. But, people should be given a free choice and it'd be interesting to see the electoral results if they redo it. But even if they are going to have a by-election, they should recount the votes so that the correct distribution of electoral funding can be had. And then say hypothetically, a loaner might get $11,500 and then she can spend another $11,500 for the by-election and therefore effectively have 23 grand spent on the election without it costing her a cent, because it comes from taxpayer money. And if she got 8.4% of the vote in the first instance, when it's correctly calculated, then perhaps she would get the same again, or maybe more, maybe less, who knows. But anyway, cheerio and be well, stay awesome. Woo!